So next we're going to take a look at some of the 3D options in After Effects. And again, it's not real 3D, it's not true 3D. We'll see the controls and things like that. So I'm starting with an empty project here. I'm going to go to my project panel, double click to import, and I'm going to import this Illustrator file, and I want to import that as composition retain layer sizes, and click OK. And then I'm going to double click on the comp, and I have just a black background, which is the color of the comp background. Remember, if I go to composition settings, I have a black background, which is fine. And then the layer from the Illustrator file is just this UFO shape, and I can move that around and we can animate that. So we want to change our modes and switches down here at the very bottom of the timeline panel. I'm going to click on this, and that gets us back to where we were before. Now if we hit P on the keyboard to open up position, you can see that we only have two properties. We have the X property and we have the Y property. Once we convert this into a 3D layer, we're going to have an additional property, which is that Z property. So I'm going to click on the check mark here to convert this into a 3D layer. And now you'll see that you have all these different handles, and they control different aspects. And you can see this guide that appears here. So the green one controls the Y, red is X, and the purplish blue is the Z index. And take a look at the properties in the panel on your layer. So now you have X, Y, and a Z value here. Then for orientation, you also have X, Y, and Z. And then for X rotation and Y rotation, that's going to be based on those things. What you're going to find for your 3D animation is that you're going to focus usually on orientation or position. That's usually what we're going to do. If I were to move my cursor over the Z index here and I start dragging, see what happens. It's trying to move. So this is not scale. Just want to get that clear. This is not scale. This is moving the object away from or near the camera. So that's what this is doing. So if I just return this to 0. And then if I move this on X, it's just like moving on X generally, just like normally. So there's nothing great about that. And then you'll see for Y, it does the same thing. So it's just moving up and down. So nothing really great about that. So orientation though, this is where things get really interesting. So the orientation on the X plane, so you can see what it's doing here. You can create kind of like a flip, card flip, and you can see the 3D elements that are attached to this object as I spin this around. You can do that for the Y, so it's going to flip on that axis. That one's really useful. And then flipping on Z is actually just rotating. Because if you think about it, the Z index is either forward or backwards, so it's not really going to produce too much. Rotation here is going to be the X rotation that we just saw in the orientation, and the rotation Y is going to do the same thing here. Later on, we'll get into some of these options under material options, but we just want to stress that this isn't real 3D. This is just what Chris Georginas is a good animator. He taught me a lot about animation, and what he calls this is 2.5D, which is actually accurate. So it's like it's a 2D object, but there's a dimension to it, right? So that's the whole thing. So animating a 3D object, what you can do with these orientation options is probably the most useful thing to do. So I'm going to click on the orientation stopwatch, and the object is as it is now. I'm going to go to 1 second, and then I'm going to use the Y axis here. I'm going to flip that around to this point, and I'm going to go out to 2, and I'll continue that till I get to 180. You can actually type in the values if you want. So now we get this kind of spinning effect. And you can see it kind of has the appearance of the object flipping, right? It's just an optical illusion really, but It makes it look like the object is flipping. So that's kind of cool. And we can easily use these keyframes. And we can set up the graph editor however we want to. Now there's handles on this object. So if you move your cursor over the red arrow, you'll see that you're going to move on the y-axis. If you move your cursor over the green arrow, you're going to move that on the y-axis, and then you have these dots for the z-index, right? And then this is also for the z-index, but when you click and drag on this one, it's going to move it forward or backward in space. So that's what the handles do. Now, in addition to the 3D options that are on the layer, we have different views for the camera. And right now, I'm just looking at the active camera. But if you click on this drop down, you could go to Custom View 1. This will show you an appearance of what this would look like in 3D space. And then Custom View 2 and 3, we're all kind of simulating what it's going to look like. If I go back to the active camera, you can see what that is. So if I were to, let's say that I duplicate this object a couple of times, and then on this one, I'm going to click the P, and I actually want to get to the orientation options, right? So I want to take the Z index and I want to set it to -90. Not that, not on that. This one, -90. Let's say. Now it doesn't look like anything's happening, but if I switch the view, you can see that what I just did there was I kind of pushed this object forward in space or back in space. So a positive value pushes it back in space. A negative value pushes it towards the camera. Right? And then if I drag this, right? And then for, let's say, this copy, I'll go to the position property, and actually I can just use this and just drag, right? So now you have 3D objects that are twirling. They're all twirling, and they're in different spaces, but that's only evident in this view. If I go back to the active view, it's just going to look like flat objects spinning. So there's things you can do with cameras. And the other thing is that you can add your own cameras. So under Layer to New, you can add lights and cameras, and that will really kind of start making your 3D objects kind of come to life. And we can get into that more in detail. But I just wanted to give you an overview of the 3D options and manipulating the 3D options inside of After Effects.